Okay, in this video we're going to talk about quadratic and square root functions and finding their inverse. Okay, so let's recall that to find the inverse, first of all, this is the notation, and to find the inverse, when you find it, the domain of the original function becomes the range of the inverse, and the range of the original function becomes the domain of the inverse. Okay, so when you restrict one of those, it's going to restrict both of them. Okay, so in order to find the domain of f prime of x, we would find the range, which would be the y values. Okay. Now keep in mind this function is not one-to-one, so if this particular graph here had to be restricted, you'd want to restrict it to be one side or the other. So if this was, let's say this was just a regular x squared function, you'd want to say, well, I only want to look at this side, or I only want to look at this side. But if you look at both, this will fail the horizontal line test because it's not a one-to-one function. Okay, so looking at the problems, we're going to graph these functions and with the given domain, because they're going to be restricted, and we're going to use the graph to determine the range of f of x, which is the domain of f inverse of x. Okay, and in order to do it, we're going to switch the x and y and solve for y. Okay, so let's take a look at this first one. We've got f of x is equal to x squared plus 7. So in order to find the inverse function, I first need to write it as y equals x squared plus 7. And then I'll switch the x and the y. So I'll get x is equal to y squared plus 7. Subtract the 7, so x minus 7 equals y squared. And then I'll use the square root property, which typically, the square root property, we need to put a plus or minus. In this case, I'm only going to put the plus, okay, because the domain here is restricted. Okay, so I will find that I have f inverse of x is equal to the square root of x minus 7. Okay, so let's go back to this and let's graph this with this domain in mind. I found the inverse, but I do want to graph this so I can see what the domain and range is of my new function. So this is a parabola that's been shifted up 7, and we're only graphing it from 0 to infinity, which is on this part of the graph. Okay, not over here. It starts from 0 to infinity, goes out this direction. Okay, so I get from here, and I'm going to get a parabola that looks like that. Okay, and now when I graph my inverse function, it's a square root function that's been shifted over to the right by 7. So I'll start here, and I'll go this way. And notice that you should always get a mirror image on either side of the line y is equal to x, and we do. Okay, so it says to state the domain of this one. Now we can look at the range of the original function, the range being the y value, so it goes from 7 to infinity, which means the domain of this inverse function is also from 7 to infinity. So the domain of f inverse is from 7 to infinity. Okay, and likewise, if we wanted to look at the range, we could look at the domain of this original function and say, well, the domain goes from 0 to infinity, so the range of this function is also going to be 0 to infinity. Okay, let's do another one. So this one we have a square root function that's been shifted over right twice and up 7. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph that. Right twice and up 7 would be here. Okay, so this function is going to look like this. My graph is not perfect, but that gives you an idea. Okay, and we know our domain is going to be restricted from 2 to infinity, which means the range of the inverse function is also going to be from 2 to infinity. We can look at the range of this and say, well, it starts at 7 and keeps going up forever. So the range of the original function is from 7 to infinity, which means the range of the inverse function, or the domain of the inverse function, needs to be from 7 to infinity. All right, so let's find the inverse. Y is equal to square root of x minus 2 plus 7. Switch the x and y. So here we go. Subtract the 7, so x minus 7 is equal to the square root of y minus 2. Square both sides to get rid of that square root. Okay, so you get x minus 7 squared is equal to y minus 2, and then add the 2 over, so you get x minus 7 squared plus 2 is equal to y, we'll go ahead and write that in the inverse function notation. Okay, so this is a parabola, okay, that has been shifted up by 7, or excuse me, has been shifted right by 7 and up by 2. Okay, so right by 7 and up by 2, there's where the center of it is. Okay, and I'm only going to draw this portion of it, okay, because I know that the range of this function here says I'm going from 7 to infinity, which means the domain of this is from 7 to infinity. So it's not going to include anything less than 7. So the range of this original function f of x, is the same as the domain of, well, not g of x, f inverse of x. Okay, so it looks like this, and notice that it creates a mirror image on either side of the line, y is equal to x. Okay, so what is the domain of this one? Well, it's the same as the range, like I said. It goes from 7 to infinity, just like the range of this one goes from 7 to infinity. So the domain of f inverse goes from 7 to infinity. Okay, let's look at a couple more of these. So this one we have f of x equal to square root of 1 minus x plus 6. Okay, so I'm going to write that as f of x is equal to the square root of negative, factoring out a negative inside there, x minus 1 plus 6. Okay, that will help me figure out how it shifts, and that is a minus 1 there. Excuse my poor handwriting. But I factor out the negative to say, well, the square root's going to face the opposite direction. So instead of going like this, it's actually going to go like this. Okay, and then the shift over is 1. Okay, because it's the opposite of the direction, or opposite of the sign, and then plus 6. So I go over 1, up 6 here, and then it's going to look like this. Okay, and notice that our domain of our original function is negative infinity to 1, and that's pretty much what it looks like there. Okay, now if we go to find the inverse, say y is equal to square root of 1 minus x plus 6. I'm going to go ahead and write it how it originally was. I only wrote it this way to see what the graph looks like. Okay, so x is equal to the square root of 1 minus y plus 6, x squared. Actually, no. Sorry, we moved the 6 over first. So x minus 6 equals the square root of 1 minus y. Square both sides. So x minus 6 squared equals 1 minus y. Okay, and then I can move the y over here to make it positive, and I can move this over here to make it negative. So I get y is equal to negative x minus 6 squared plus 1. Okay, and that is the same thing as f inverse of x is equal to this. Okay, so the negative out front means the parabola is going to be opening upside down. It's going to look like this. Okay, and then the minus 6 means I'm going to shift over to the right by 6, and then the plus 1 goes up 1. So over 6 and then up 1. Okay, and now it's a parabola, but I can only draw half of it, right? Not the whole thing. Okay, because I've been restricted. Okay, so the domain of the original has been restricted from negative infinity to 1, which means the range of this one is from negative infinity into 1. Okay, that's fine. We know it's opening downward. What is the range of this one? It looks like it goes from 6 to infinity. So this one needs to go from 6 to infinity on the domain. So we're going to open up this way, like this. Okay, so we're not going to do this side because we're restricted. The range of this one is from 6 to infinity, so the domain of this one has to be from 6 to infinity. Okay, and again, it looks like a mirror image across that. Okay, now the domain of f inverse of x is equal to 6 to infinity. Okay, last one. So consider the function f of x is equal to x plus 5 squared for the domain -5 to infinity. Okay, so this is a parabola that's been shifted left by 5. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. And it says it wants the range to be from -5 to infinity. So can't be any farther over left than -5. So the parabola is only going to show the right side here. Okay. If it would have said from -infinity to -5, then we would use the left side. Okay. So let's find the inverse. So y is equal to x plus 5 squared. And then x is equal to y plus 5 squared. Square root of both sides. The square root of x is equal to y plus 5. Now, the square root property says you should put a plus or minus on either side, but we're taking the positive side of this parabola, so we're going to take the positive one here. Okay, and so we subtract the 5, so we get the square root of x minus 5 is equal to y. So f inverse of x is equal to the square root of x minus 5. Okay, so the square root of x, we know what that looks like. It's been shifted down by 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now which direction does it go? Well, it's got to go this direction, right? Okay, so we pretty much, it's a square root function, so it has to go that direction. Okay, so we also know that it's a mirror image across this line, y is equal to x, and that does look like a mirror image. So we've got it. So the domain of the original function was from -5 to infinity. The range of the original function was from 0 to infinity. So that means the range of this new function is going to be from -5 to infinity. And the domain of this new function is going to be from 0 all the way over to infinity. So the domain of f inverse of x is from 0 to infinity.